Hi everyone, thanks for joining after lunch. It's normally my job to welcome everyone to the stage, but they're already here. So before we get started, I'd just like to thank all our sponsors that make this all possible. And we've got a couple of other conferences coming up, so just to direct your attention to Capacity Europe and our Global Carrier Awards. But I won't keep you any longer. I'd like to hand over to John, our moderator for the day. Take it away.
Okay, thanks Chris. Well, welcome to our session, The Next Decade of Fibreisation from the Core to the Tower Edge. I'm John Nee, president of Act One Partners. We're a marketing agency that focuses exclusively on telecom and technology companies and working with them to help their marketing efforts. I'm also the host of the podcast, Your Marketing Moment. And I'd like to start off by just calling out a comment that was made earlier this year in the first quarter when many top operators chose to trim back their expansion plans for their fiber networks. And largely that was due to some of the economic uncertainties and geopolitical unrest, but it did beg the question, what does fiberization mean for the next decade? And we're going to sort through some of that today. And fortunately, we've got a great panel of experts to help us work through that topic. We'll start with some general questions, and then we'll open it up to some questions from all of you early on so that we can make sure that you get your questions asked. But before we dive into that content, I'd like to first introduce our panelists. First, we have Ariana Bottori, who is Senior Investment Officer and Global Lead for Broadband Investments for International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank Group. She leads the structuring of equity, mezzanine, and debt investments for telecommunication and technology companies in the emerging markets. Then we have Jeremy, Vice President of Wholesale Solutions for AT&T Business, and he's responsible for delivering secure and scalable high bandwidth Ethernet services capable of managing data-heavy workloads from numerous locations and endpoints. We also have Jay Anderson, FiberLight's Chief Engineer, who leads the company in network design and network planning. He also leads critical cross-functional initiatives to promote organizational growth and the effective use of processes and software. And then finally, we have Eric Kusch, Chief Operating Officer for Eurofiber. Eric is responsible for Eurofiber's 66,000 kilometer network and 11 data centers in Germany, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. He's also responsible for security, innovation, IT, and he chairs the D&I board for the company. So welcome, panelists. So let's get started with, I think, a general question that all of our panelists can provide some insights into, and that is, when evaluating fiber investments or expanding fiber networks, what decision factors have changed the most in the last 12 months and how? So, Ariana, why don't we start with you? Has the investment lens changed for fiber networks?
As an investor, we've definitely seen the COVID boom, call it, right? Everybody needed more fiber in more places. So if I look at our investment volume, definitely 2020 onwards, there's been a constant increase, and it's still going strong. In terms of what has changed, say, in the last 12 to 18 months, it's probably more so due to the kind of macro environment. I think with the raising interest rates and all of these other operational, actually non-operational factors impacting broadband companies, they've had to really prioritize where they put their money to work. And us as an investor, basically, we're kind of asking more questions, call it, right? So I think every dollar of CapEx probably gets more scrutiny, and I look forward to hearing from the operators here. But from a financing point of view, definitely we're more careful into where we deploy the capital, what is the return on that capital, and how do we ride out basically these turbulent economic times. And my investment lens is also a bit unique in the sense that we focus on investments abroad, so outside the United States and outside of most developed markets. So usually there's even more risk factors to take into account. Sometimes even if a company executes impeccably and everything is according to the budget and to plan, simply by the fact that they operate in country X and the currency has depreciated by 20%. You can imagine from a return point of view, there's some significant other factors to be taken into account.
Right, yeah, so it sounds like a much more deliberate and intentional process than maybe in the past. Jerry, how about from an operator standpoint?
I think from AT&T's standpoint, we're very focused on expanding our fiber footprint. So a big commitment. Obviously, our business is going through immense change. We're retiring legacy systems, being really able to migrate clients to new connectivity services. We've spent over $140 billion over the last 5 years in not only fiber into the ground, but also in our wireless business, buying spectrum. So big commitments. Certainly, we see the future as fiber. So this is a very relevant discussion for us. We actually just announced about a week ago a joint venture with a company called BlackRock. We announced a company called Gigapower, which is actually going to enhance our fiber coverage outside of our traditional footprint. So we're very excited about that, and that was just launched this past week. So we're extremely committed, and all systems go.
Excellent. Jay?
Yeah, so FiberLight has gone under a transformation here recently with an acquisition with HRL Morrison and Company. And one of the things that we've really previously had been really cash strapped. And so we were really creative in how we tried to come up with deals with our customers that made sense. But in the new environment, we're definitely looking at a much, much longer lead time when it comes to the investment into the plant. Even over the last 5 to 10 years, we've on average built over 1,000 route miles a year. Every one of those has had a customer that landed it with us that was able to have an opportunity. But even it changed how the landscape of how we did the analysis of the data itself. Who's around that route? What other benefits do we have? And then even in the last 12 months specifically, re-looking at what's in the marketplace when it comes to government funding, grants, all the funding that's out there, understanding how that can be leveraged in our own network and how it can be leveraged for our customers is really a big dynamic change that we're also trying to take into place right now. So other than just normal financing and how that occurs, there's a lot of money out there that we can actually use in parallel with that other investment to really create a product for our customers and the landscape in our industry. As everyone said already, and that's what this is all about, is fiberization. We've got to go deeper, even though that a lot of the technology, whether it's 5G and Wi-Fi 6 and all the things that are coming out, the more wireless you need, the more fiber you need, because you've got limited spectrum when it comes from an RF perspective, and you've got to get fiber closer to that endpoint. And even beyond just what humans, right, that we're using our phones and talking and doing text, I think in the next 10 years, which is again what we're talking about today, there's going to be a very dynamic change in and I don't know all the answers to what it is yet, but what's creating those bits and packets and actually needing to communicate from machine to machine, machine to human, et cetera. So it's going to be interesting the next 10 years for sure.
Well, we were hoping you'd bring your crystal ball with you and tell us exactly what was going to happen.
For sure.
Eric, how about the European perspective?
Yeah, so if you look at what has changed, some things don't change. So the focus on having double-digit growth every year in revenue and EBITDA, that's a constant in our kind of business. But the way to get there you see some things changing. For instance, we are very cautious in expanding our portfolio, looking at the returns that we make and the margins. There is a lot of technology pressure, of course, to go into a lot of new sexy services like SD-WAN, SASE, mobile private networks, you name it. But we have much more discussions in our board on the margin that these services bring. How will they help us to get a more solid ARPU, not only to get more stickiness with customers, but also make sure that the margin stays on the high level that we are used to when you look at basic connectivity. And that's hard to do because with the new technologies, of course, the margin is under pressure. You have to do a balancing act between keeping your customer and keeping your margin. So that's really a discussion that is now much more intense than it used to be. Second thing is we have a lot of inorganic growth, and we spend much more time now discussing about the post-merger risk, and how do we really make sure that we get all the synergies in very solid plans, not only in aspirational plans. So that's also changed. And the last thing is that we have more attention for de-risking our activities. So Eurofiber has set up lately two big collaboration activities where we have a joint venture, one in Belgium, one in Germany, simply to de-risk the activities that we do. And that's also a new element, I think, in the way we do business.
Well, why don't we stick with that theme? You mentioned merger a couple of times, and our industry is marked by consolidation and competition. And so from your perspective, Eric, and then we'll hear from the others as well, what role is consolidation and competition playing now, and how do you see it laying the groundwork for the next 10 years?
Well, 10 years, then I need your crystal ball, Jay, so let's talk about that later. But if I simply look at what's happening now, let's say time span, looking ahead 3 years or so, then there are some trends that are quite clear. Europe is a very diversified landscape. We work in 4 countries, and to be honest, in all those 4 countries, we see different drivers linked to the item of consolidation. And consolidation is happening in all those 4 countries, but they have very different characteristics. So if you look at, for instance, France, where we had a lot of regional powerhouses, local entrepreneurs building their fiber networks, we see that they need to get to a bigger scale than they used to have in order to be competitive in the future, because otherwise they're eaten up by the national players. So for us, that was the reason why we were successful in acquiring 8 companies in France, bringing them together into one unit for Eurofiber France, because we simply saw that those regional players needed a bigger party to work with. So in France, I think that is a trend that these regional players are being absorbed in national players. That's one source of consolidation. But if you look at the Netherlands, that's not the case. There you don't have a plethora of regional small players. There is much more the fact that players that were successful in specific businesses like developing fiber on business parks need to stop their business because it's simply saturated. So this is another driver for them to look at parties like us to collaborate and maybe get merged with. Germany, in Germany, I think we're not talking consolidation yet. We're talking about development, because this country is huge and has a lot of demand for fiber. But there you see a number of players stepping out of that business because I think we got carried away a little bit by the opportunity, and too many activities started without a solid base. So there you see some companies stepping out, but not because it's consolidation, but more because they were over-optimistic. And Belgium is one of the most complex countries you can imagine. There we see much more the consolidation coming from a purely rational approach that you need collaboration and JVs to make it work in that small country. And that's why we have a JV in Belgium, but also some of our colleagues have the same in other parts, and it makes sense there for a totally different reason to consolidate. So it's a mixed picture, but consolidation is there from different angles.
Right. Ariana, from a worldwide perspective or from an investment perspective, how do you see consolidation and competition affecting the fiberization over the next decade?
There's been a lot of activity, right? I think of late, prices probably in the private markets haven't gone down as fast as we've seen the public multiples go down. And that led to kind of a slowdown in M&A activity, because I still think there's a lot of good assets out there, but probably the sellers that have a choice and have the luxury of waiting will probably wait. It's not a great time to put your company on the market if you know your multiple is going to be low. So there's a little bit of that happening. But there are still opportunities. And at least for the companies we look at in emerging markets, there's still organic and inorganic growth taking place. The only thing is that, of course, now the cost of funding that acquisition is probably higher, so the hurdle is going to be higher. there needs to be a clear upside so that post-integration you generate the target returns.
Jay or Jerry, any comments from a U.S. perspective on consolidation and competition, how it affects your businesses?
Sure, no, absolutely. I'll take it first. And, you know, there's a lot of acquisitions going on. I mean, we're one where we're changing ownership now, obviously. I know that there's a lot of, I'll try to steer on the technical side. We all know we've got to be profitable, meet financial objectives, and meet the bottom line revenue. One of the ways that we're looking at doing that is making sure that we have a network that is built, right? We're continuing to invest in the fiber plant, but we also know things are changing. Again, we've already talked about wireless infrastructure, what that's going out. We need more fiber to support that. So one of the things that our desire and what we're looking at doing is making sure that we're partnering with the right other companies and that eventually potentially could be acquired that fit into our model from the perspective of where we think the industry is going. So for example, I think that a lot of fiber industries, as the proverbial edge that we all kind of would like to know the final answer where that's going to end up or what it looks like, I do believe it's going to change and be different from one company to another. So trying to build a network and join partnerships with other companies that could either be acquired or through their technologies that can join so that you can actually build an infrastructure for all industries. If you think about it, every industry in the world, it's touched by our industry. Every single one. Every single one needs communication, at least if they're going to succeed. And again, for us, and I think in the next 10 years, knowing where that ends up wavering or meandering through the network to where do we fit with, for example, having an edge data center that fits right close to the need for our end customers and clients is really going to be a fun adventure over the next 10 years. So.
Jay, I would just add that clearly we're driving an indirect model where we're leveraging partners to drive volume. And so we're seeing just a pent-up demand, both on the wireless side and on the fiber side. So, you know, the convergence of technologies and taking advantage of that opportunity, we're very excited about the opportunity that we have in front of us. It's been a big investment, and you know, the company's looking to obviously reap that return. And so we continue to focus on really growing our business through, if you think about Ethernet, direct, or I should say dedicated internet services, broadband, we continue to increase our reach outside of our footprint, and we'll continue to look to grow. I think that there's again an appetite for more, and so as long as we can get the return on the business, we're again highly committed in the fiber space.
So with access to capital still available, whether it's private or government funding, with demand for the services still at a post-COVID high, is there any risk of overbuilding? Eric, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, overbuild is a topic that you cannot always avoid. I mean, sometimes if you look at data centers that are being built, it's a deliberate choice to have multiple operators connectivity to the data center because the customers simply want that. So is it overbuild? I would call it operator diversity. You see, of course, a lot of debate about overbuilding from the FTTH area. If you look at the markets where we are in, we see that risk, of course, still being there. We see sometimes that governments are helping to coordinate it a little bit more, so it's not an opportunistic activity going on. But most of the times we see very rational behavior. So there will be selective areas where people simply want to have their own footprint, but it's not like it's spread over the full territory. Where you see a lot of competition, you also see a lot of collaboration in thinking about co-trenching, building out certain routes that are very expensive and very risky together, and that has been a very rational and very fruitful approach, at least what I can see happening in Europe. So I think if there is a risk, the bigger risk is more on the FTTH side. We are more a B2B player, so we see it less of that happening. But in the B2C space, yes, it will still be a risk. And then regulation needs to be a sort of mediator to control the negative effects it has on customers opening up the streets all the time.
Ariana, any thoughts on overbuilding?
So as an investor, we're sensitive to this, obviously, and we invest across mobile networks, towers, data centers, fiber. So there's overbuild potentially in any of these areas, but I fully agree with you, Eric. It matters most in certain segments rather than others. So on FTTH, because that's one of the most sensitive ones, what we look at is we try to select those operators that really have good insight into where their competitors' networks are. And I know there's been a lot of discussion this week at ITW about network automation solutions and how do we have smart networks and location services and digital twins and all of this. I really think that there shouldn't be broadband operators today that still don't have that type of tool embedded into what they do if they want to compete at the level of the last mile, consumer business. So that's, I think, the most sensitive approach. I think otherwise in towers and the mobile space, people, it's a very established business and nobody's going to build a tower next to you. It's like suicide, right? Data centers, the jury's still out. There's different types of data centers. You serve different clients. You serve different, so of course, concentration in that field is a little bit of a different topic. But I'm curious to hear other views.
Jay or Jerry, any comments?
I think that what's critical for us is just to make sure that we're the investments that we've made, that we are, we're lighting buildings, making sure that we are going aggressively after that business. Clearly, I think within the footprint, we will continue to build out where we have opportunities. There is an assessment that goes on, and as I mentioned with joint ventures like Gigapower and other opportunities, we have local network service capabilities in some metro areas outside of our footprint. So really looking to make sure that we're leveraging all of our assets. That continues to be a big focus for us, and I think, again, excited about the opportunity in front of us.
Yeah, so in honor of all the mentors I've had in my career, I will never say we've built enough network or infrastructure. It's one of those that even a year out, you're like, man, I wish we would have done that. I wish we would have put just one more conduit. I wish we had put just a few more fibers. And I don't think that's ever going to change. I think, to everyone's point, though, right time, right place. I think being very strategic in how you analyze the data and knowing why you're building it and try to come up with the very best forecast with the data that you have coming into you and making the right plan is always the right approach still. But with all that said, we are overbuilding. About once a quarter, we have a large section of our network we're constantly trying to fund and understand how we build it and how we actually fund and actually complete that overbuild. Our demand is, as a society worldwide, it's incessant, right? And it's only getting more and more. And as I said earlier, the things that are going to be creating that data and that demand, it's going to keep hockey sticking. So again, right time, right place. So there's only a finite amount of money you can spend at one point that can generate the revenue that you need to be profitable. But as much as you can squeeze out of it day one is going to prove dividends, I think. And even looking at our past in the last 10 years or so, if we had just done one thing, we could have had X number of multiples, even more than what we already have today.
Yeah, so a lot of market forces at work and some great perspectives and insights into that topic. We'd like to now open it up to the audience. If you have any questions for our panel, we'd love to hear from you, give you a chance to ask those. Any questions? Well, I know one topic that I still want to explore. It's hard to look at the news these days or even attend some of the sessions here at ITW and not hear a discussion around AI and how artificial intelligence will have an effect on the industry or any particular topic. And so, Jay, why don't we start with you as far as, what's your perspective on how AI will influence fiberization?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's not just to write a kid's school paper, for sure. Even in our own environment, we've used it lightly to be able to say, hey, what's this command that I need to use? I've been searching the documents, and I don't want to spend another 30 minutes on it. It had the answer in 2 seconds. And I know for a fact that the way that is going to change how we design our networks, how we operate it, how we plan for them, it's going to get integrated. It's going to take a few years, I think, to really get smart enough in how we do it so that there's still some controls in place. But even from the design and planning phase, I absolutely believe it's going to have a major factor in how we select and how we even decide how we want to put our money. I think beyond that, some companies, and I think one of the things that we're definitely looking into is how do you start taking the capacity that you do have in your network, right, with the fibers you use, because maybe you do need an overbuild, but you can't fund it yet. All right, how do we make that capacity that much more dynamic because you've got different traffic patterns throughout the day or throughout the week or throughout, the hour even. As people move even in a wireless network, I think we'll start to see patterns that today AI will recognize for us and allow us to then implement network software-defined dynamic networks that now move that capacity where it needs to be because it'll reduce latency as an example. That's going to be a big one that I think AI is going to allow us to see much more rapidly and much more quickly, and then actually have the network take care of it, shift that over so that we have latency. And again, the applications right now, and AI is an application as well, but there are applications we don't even know about yet. Again, even from kids writing their school paper to a doctor needing to do emergency surgery, somebody that can't get to the hospital, aren't even stable enough to get in a helicopter. So there are things we don't even know about yet, but I know for a fact that it's going to change, and our networks are going to have to be dynamic from the perspective of moving that capacity and support that technology and those applications that are going to be rapidly coming onto our network. And again, as I said earlier, the cool thing about our industry, we are every industry in the world. Every industry in the world is going to need our network. They're going to need our infrastructure. They're going to need more and more and more fiber and bandwidth. And so building a network for us that supports those and is to be nimble enough to be able to support those capacities and support those next applications that, again, we don't even know, it's going to be a fun 10 years.
Any other comments or thoughts about AI, or maybe even some ways in which it's being used today? Jerry?
I would just comment that clearly we see a tremendous opportunity to leverage AI and machine learning in terms of our network management platform, where I think that we can identify, risks, faults in the network quickly, identify them, and remedy the issue before it impacts our clients. That's where we're headed. That's where we want to be, and we really want to. Everybody wants resiliency, a network that performs without issue, and so certainly AI, machine learning, I think is going to be huge for us in the coming years.
Yeah, maybe to add another perspective. We are a bit cautious to use it in, let's say, our customer communication, because we have still some doubts about, how privacy is being handled, how it can be non-biased in handling customer interaction. So we try to be personal as a B2B player. Maybe we will use it, for internal preparation of stuff, but not really in the communication itself, although the technology is there. But we on purpose will not use it until we are fully convinced that it's solid. But on the bottom line, of course, it brings a lot. We're looking now with our engineers how we can equip them to use AI much better than they were used to. It is a bit of a risk because they feel that they are made redundant because this system is much smarter than they are. So we need to reskill them to use as a tool, not as a threat. So that will happen, but it will of course help us to perform better on the bottom line. It will save costs, it will make us more flexible. And one thing that I'm really impressed about using AI is also making very sophisticated analysis on the business itself, like for instance churn analysis. We're really impressed by the way that AI helps you to get a lot of fuzzy data together and make analysis that you would never be able to do from your human experience. So that's really powerful.
Yeah, Ariana, any thoughts?
I mean, we have 3 operators here, so I'll let the technology people tackle this. From my perspective, I think there's a lot of applications, right? From network planning, simply data mining. If we were lucky enough to operate in markets where the regulator or some other agency makes public where the networks are, it's much easier to have an AI data mine that data as opposed to having your analyst spend half a day going through it, right? And then you spoke about dynamic kind of capacity management. I'm sure it can be done for the spectrum as well if we ever get to that day trading spectrum, right? And wouldn't that be cool? I do think that question of neutrality is there, right? So you basically, as an operator, are assuming the liability for whatever that AI-based application will do, whether it's blocking customer X from accessing its data or, you know. So that's definitely a lot of technical and legal hurdles to go through. But I think at the operational level, it's very powerful. And again, I'm thinking of kind of the retail broadband operators, just how useful it will be to have AI create customer profiles so you can bucket your customers, right? And segment them and know that category A is more likely to churn and category B is more likely to do this, and predict patterns, anticipate that, you know, my customers in category C tend to churn after 5 months, so let me call him, offer him a promotion. Hey, you want to stay on my network? I think it's powerful at the operational kind of customer management level.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. Well, we've talked a lot about strategy and market forces. Let's talk a bit now about the technology itself. You know, we expect that there's going to be technological evolution of the fiber itself over the next 10 years. And Jerry, what do you think the effect this will have on the technology from the core to the tower?
Well, I think what everybody wants is they want you know, higher capacity speeds. We quickly went from 1 gig to 10 gig. We've got Ace on Demand, which is our Ethernet, our switched Ethernet offer, and the ability to you know, basically ramp up to 100 gig, bring down when you know, the demand isn't there. So we just, again, I think for us, it's really about being able to provide between leveraging what we've done from a wireless perspective and building out, and I think Jay touched on it earlier about, you know, these fiber builds, how important it is to get you know, close to these cell towers. We all know that 5G demands you know, small cell, lots of antennas, and then you've got to have that robust fiber network to provide that backhaul and the front haul to basically enable and the connectivity. So again, you know, certainly seeing a big time trend in terms of big data and driving more over the network.
Any other thoughts about the actual technology itself of the fiber?
Yeah,
Jay?
I guess the one comment I would say is I think, you know, 2 things. One, the RF side of the world will drive more capacity and demand and bandwidth to the fiber network. It will demand more and more fiber. And so I think that technology, as it changes, as our phones change, as there's devices, the IoT type devices, they're now connecting to that wireless network. Those are what's going to be driving that demand. And again, applications of how they get used and the kind of data specifically they're trying to communicate with. I don't know what that is. I mean, a school system being pretty basic when it's textbooks, that's one that's easy to kind of comprehend. Is, okay, well, if I've got 1,000 students that need this textbook, I don't want to have to wait and upload, or if it's dynamic enough, you've got to get a small, call it edge data center close to them. And again, that's just one example. I think the applications that are changing in the user base right now is what's going to drive the technological changes that we're going to have to figure out as an industry. You know, how do we get that quick data dump of a petabyte down to rural nowhere, right, in America, because there's a school system there that needs that data, or there's a rural nowhere, you know, oil and gas company that now has applications that's for security, or down by the border of a country, right, where you need, you know, fast, rapid access to the person who you think you have to see who they are. All those things take tons of data, and again, our society is kind of insatiable, right? We want everything now, we want it instantly. So reducing latency, the network being resilient enough to kind of even help predict some of that as we've talked about. But then those applications that are going to drive what our network has to do to give the customers and clients and, you know, humans and maybe non-humans the access that they demand and desire for whatever they're trying to accomplish in life.
Excellent. Eric or Ariana, thoughts?
Yeah, building on what Jay said, I think I was one of the early believers that we would see low latency applications on the back of 5G. We already did 5 years ago some pilots with Vodafone in Germany to test it. Well, it didn't really materialize yet, but nobody knows how it may accelerate now, because all of us will be accompanied by an AI-based tooling that will integrate in our lives. So, and if that happens, one can imagine also that it will require low latency networks to take full benefit of all that bundled intelligence that we will get from AI. So we are already now thinking about how will this affect our data center infrastructure. So building on not only edge-like data centers, but distributed data centers and moving workloads where we have ample supply of energy and sustainable resources, and also using that to build this low latency network and the edge capacity that has to follow. So I think that will be a big development coming up. And the second one I would say is security. Security is not a nice to have, it's really essential. So we're investing now really with our customers also to build that integrated within our network, not as a layer on top, but as an integral part of it. And I think the third thing is private networks. I think we will really see private networks coming up. So now we're bringing fiber into the building, into the campus, and not only connecting the campus. And I think that will be a big development also, because with 5G, private companies now can build their own networks, and they will look to infrastructure players like us to help them build it. Nice. Ariana, any thoughts?
I'll sit this one out because I think I agree with everything that's been said.
All right. Any other questions from the audience? We have one here. Chris, do you have a mic?
Hi, good discussion. I'm John Salentano with Inside Towers. How do the costs to deploy fiber change the farther away from the core you get?
Okay. Jay?
Sure. So definitely more concrete, higher the cost, and usually more people means more permitting requirements. So typically, the further out you go, it's definitely going to drop the cost. Obviously, soil conditions and geographics still have a matter of, fact of, what it's going to take to actually dig up the ground. But it definitely reduces. I mean, and it's a factor of multiples for sure. But every area in at least the U.S. where I'm familiar with, the soil conditions are the biggest, and obviously concrete. And if you've got to go under a railroad and the permitting aspects, but it's, call it a factor of 10 at least from a rural or urban area from a rural area.
Anyone else? Jerry, you want to weigh in on that?
Just, obviously, we've got, a ton of construction, and you mentioned the permitting. That seems to be the long pole in the tent, right? And so once we get past that, I mean, we're trying to accelerate, but the further out, you know, the more expensive it certainly is. So,
Any other questions?
I would add to that real quick while y'all are thinking of another question that we need. But, you know, I think different ways that we can use, there are definitely new manufacturing of cables and things like that that are much more optimal to pull in, much more smaller in diameter that allows us to pull in. There's a few technologies when it comes to even kind of flexible ducting that allows us to kind of pre-plan and how we leverage that for different customers. There's a lot of technology and kind of new schemes of ways to attack your duct system right now too. So it's pretty interesting to study.
Okay, excellent. Any other questions? Okay, well, I think we're just about out of time anyway. Chris, we're going to wrap things up. Okay. Well, thanks, everyone. Thanks especially to our panelists and their time up here and their perspective and interest. And thanks to all of you. And thanks to ITW and our sponsors.
And thank you to John for being an excellent moderator. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you for joining us. If you hang around for just a couple more minutes, we're beginning our network transformation content. We'll be kicking off looking at the automation of our networks. So please hang around for that. Take care, everyone.